Hello friends, thank you so much for joining me here at Untoxic Home. I'm glad you're here. This video is a continuation in our series, How to Research Everything. And today we're talking about going back to the basics. What am I talking about? Well, so in anything that you might come upon to research, in anything that's in the news, anything that's sweeping the world, anything at all, period. All right, you got to go back to the basics. Basic assumptions must always be addressed and researched if you want to obtain the truth. A lot of people don't start at the basics when they do their research. They start with assumptions that they believe to be true, but haven't actually researched it. That's a very faulty approach to research, my friend. You're not going to get the truth if you do that. You're going to get propaganda if you do that. For example, let's say you have a diagnosis of fibromyalgia. I've got a video up. If you go to our website, search fibromyalgia. I cured it, all right? It is curable, and I had a very, very, very bad case. Very bad case. I was told that it was the worst in the state, and I had it for a number of years. There are various natural treatments for fibromyalgia, and there are, of course, various non-natural treatments, lots of pharmaceuticals. But what's the cause? So if you're considering treating fibromyalgia, then the basis would be, what's the cause? What causes the symptoms? What has to be addressed in order to cure it? Not just mask the symptoms, not just deal with having it. What's the cause of it? Western medicine fails miserably here. I do address in my video on fibromyalgia and how I cured it, the true causes of it, at least in my case, and in the case of others as well, who have similarly cured their fibromyalgia as well. And this is a problem that is endemic to Western medicine, Western society in general, because we realize that we have a diagnosis and we just try to put Band-Aids on it rather than figure out what the cause is and address that. So going back to basics when it comes to a diagnosis such as fibromyalgia means going back to the cause, figuring out what the cause is. Oftentimes there are multiple causes. So my experience with that is that the fibromyalgia was triggered by exposure to new carpet. My parents got new carpet when I was 12 or 13. And then I laid on the carpet doing my homework and reading because I've always been a nerd. And so that carpet was just right here, very close. And so I breathed in all those fumes. And of course, my body was already primed, though, from a product that was actually experimental that was given to me when I was very, very young. And because my immune system was primed, then it was pretty much over for me as far as that goes. And so addressing chemical exposure and exposure to non-native EMFs, getting off of all the pharmaceuticals, of course, this is not medical information or advice, consult your doctor, blah, blah, blah. But this is what cured my fibromyalgia in essence. And so I go through all of the steps in that post, in that video, so that you can cure it too if you have it, or if you know someone who does have it, because it is absolutely 100% curable. So another example here. Let's say there's a new virus that's in the news. It's sweeping the world, okay? All right. So going back to the base, most people start with, okay, well, here are these articles that talk about where it came from or how it was developed in a biolab or all of these other things, how birds are spreading it, because right now I'm dealing with bird flu. I'm not dealing with it, but I'm keeping an eye on it because I got birds. So we got chickens. So I have to be sure that we don't end up with Uncle Sam knocking on our door and trying to do crazy pants things that are unethical and poisoning my birds. So got to be careful about that. But let's say this, for example, the bird flu. The bird flu is sweeping across the world right now. a lot of people will look at news articles and such, and they might look at some studies, that sort of thing, but they won't go back to the basics. What is the basics when it comes to a virus? Well, what is a virus? That would be going back to the basics, right? You can't skip these steps and know what you're talking about. You have to go back to the basics. This should be common sense, in my opinion. Unfortunately, it isn't. So what is a virus? How are viruses empirically isolated and proven to cause harm? How are they isolated? How are they proven to cause harm? Two other very, very, very basic questions, correct? So you can't be talking about bird flu virus and all of the other different things about the virus until you establish what is a virus, how are viruses isolated, and how are they proven to cause harm. And so I've got a video, a 5-minute video. Go to our website, search virus. You'll find it. And I demonstrate years. It's the culmination of years of research, reading lots of books, contacting virologists. And one of the things when you contact an expert is that they have you have to keep in mind, is that they have a very narrow worldview. Okay? And so they can't see what's outside that worldview. They cannot see outside of that. And so they have these basic tenets and beliefs that if these beliefs are violated, they can't function. They can't do their job. Everything they've done was wrong in their entire lives, employment-wise. So this happens in just about all vectors of employment. I mean, I saw this happen in social work, and on and on and on and on. So these sorts of things have to be considered when you're contacting a so-called expert such as a virologist, because they're not going to come out typically and tell you what you are actually interpreting and understanding, but you can contact them and say, hey, you used this word in this study. What do you mean by that? And a lot of times they are just so blinded by being in this box that they exist in, that they will tell you the truth, but still say and believe otherwise. It's just crazy. Like, it really is crazy to see this happen, but just blinded. People are just blinded. All right, so those are some very basic questions about viruses, right? So, but if you're going to talk about viruses, you got to ask these questions, you got to research these questions, and you got to find the truth about these questions. Are there alternative causes of the disease potentially? For example, the bird flu that is sweeping the world. Classic microwave sickness. Classic microwave sickness. It couldn't be more obvious. Anyone who knows anything about microwave sickness is going to say, oh, that's microwave sickness. If you know about microwave sickness in a chicken, in avians, in birds. And so there are actually a lot of bird flocks right now, wild bird flocks specifically, that are just dropping out of the sky, just dying. And what isn't being addressed by these researchers who are trying to find the truth is exosome theory, for one, which is a competing theory to viral theory, to germ theory. They're not addressing terrain theory. They're not questioning whether these birds could have been poisoned. They're not asking if the test says that it's there, then that's that. But what if viruses are really exosomes? Because here's the thing. A lot of virologists in their peer-reviewed studies readily admit that they cannot empirically distinguish between a virus and an exosome. An exosome is, of course, produced by the body when it is poisoned. And so if you can't tell the difference between a virus and an exosome, and you're saying these birds died from bird flu, How can you say that? You can't say that if you don't know if what you're looking at is a virus or an exosome, can you? This is very, very, very basic. So it is essential to go back to basics when you research anything and everything. Viruses, if they can't be scientifically distinguished from exosomes, why is everybody freaking out about germ theory all the time and not freaking out about this toxic world that we live in? They're dousing themselves with chemicals in fear of viruses, when in reality they're making themselves sick by poisoning themselves. But there are countless peer-reviewed studies that readily admit that you can't tell the difference between an exosome and a virus. This is very basic, don't you think? What about terrain theory? That's another competing theory to viral theory. So for every assumption, scientifically speaking, there's always at least one competing assumption. There's always at least one competing theory. And so if you operate believing that a theory is fact, that's faulty. It's a theory for a reason, not a fact, not a law. A theory is a theory because it's theoretical and it hasn't been proven. So germ theory, for example, let's question that a little bit. Has germ theory been demonstrated empirically as being valid, or has it been disproven? Well, most studies today, actually almost all studies today on viruses, operate based on the assumption that germ theory is valid and that it's been proven, not disproven. Of course, science and proving, the word proving is a bit of another topic, which we'll have to discuss at another time. But research studies can disprove. And in the Spanish flu epidemic, which swept part of the world, not the whole world, don't be deceived, do your research, there were some incredibly well done, properly controlled studies done. And there were quite a few actually that were done. And they were conducted on humans. They were conducted, I believe, on dogs or cats, monkeys, some kind of rodent, and some birds. I want to say they were probably pigeons because pigeons are typically what are used scientifically speaking. But they may not have been pigeons. I don't remember for sure. And these are all separate studies. All right. And there were multiple assumptions about germ theory. Okay, so if you're sick, you got a cold, okay? And you walk up to someone who is healthy, doesn't have a cold, and you sneeze in their face, then germ theory would say that the healthy person's going to get sick with a cold, right? Here's the thing. That's not what happened in the studies. There were multiple studies. That's not what happened. Similarly, let's say you got the flu, the Spanish flu, and the snot then that you have in your body, somebody takes your snot or your saliva and puts it into somebody else that isn't sick, then that person should get sick, right? Because your germs are in them, right? But that's not what happened. That's not what happened in these studies. That's not the result that was found. Quite the opposite. And this was done in humans. It was actually, they're actually very good sized sample cohort sizes. And so these studies found they couldn't make people sick with germs, what was presumed to be germs. Similarly, when this was conducted on monkeys and avians and rodents, etc., they found the same thing. They couldn't make these animals sick with germs, with what they thought were germs. How does that work if germ theory is valid? Well, my friend, it doesn't work if germ theory is valid. Now, does it? This is evidence that germ theory is invalid, yet today, that's all that's talked about is how we need to sanitize everything. Wait, this doesn't make any sense, does it? This upside down world tells us that germ theory is valid, it's proven, but it's been disproven. here's the thing. These studies should have been meticulously analyzed and conducted repeatedly over the past 100 years. Many, many, many times. But they weren't. At least if they were, they weren't published. And if they weren't, or they were just hidden from us, if they were indeed conducted. If you can find them, then good for you. I wasn't able to find more research on this. This should be something that's regularly done. This should be an experiment that's conducted like all the time to validate germ theory, don't you think? Because that's the premise of so much of what we are told to do today is germ theory. No matter what topic you're researching, it's generally best to begin at establishing the most basic assertions. Otherwise, you are going to mislead yourself. You're going to develop beliefs that are fallacious. You must start at the base. You got to start at the beginning. Rather than beginning up here with assumptions and doing, you got to start down here at the base. You got to start at the bottom. Just as when you're reading, when you're learning how to read, you don't start with reading Shakespeare. You start with the ABCs, don't you? You can't skip this step if you want to know the truth. Unfortunately, most people skip many steps, assuming that the experts are being honest and that they know the truth. Now, sometimes the experts are just lying to your face, but sometimes they're deceived themselves because they believe what their professor told them. We actually recently watched a documentary about biblical archaeology, and what we saw was that this professor learned from this professor, who learned from this professor, who learned from this professor. And so the professor today has a belief based on 3 different generations of professors. But they didn't actually look for the research, look to confirm an assertion themselves. Rather, they believed what the experts told them because the professor that they learned from was the expert. So this is similar to how most people operate today. Follow the money. Question and research everything if you have the time. If you don't have the time, question it. At least follow the money and consider how money manipulates everything today and how money manipulates, quite frankly, the so-called opinions of so-called experts today. If you want to be healthy, if you want to know the truth, you got to start at the basics. You can't start up here in the pyramid. You got to start down here and then move forward. All right. Thank you so much for being here. I would appreciate it if you would give this video a thumbs up wherever you're at. Be sure to subscribe, ring the bell, and go subscribe to our newsletter so that you don't miss new posts. Thanks so much for being here, friends. Have a most beautiful and blessed day.